You gotta admit though, it's a bloody big Mysterio. Hello, and welcome to the Jimquisition, where I'm not fully unaware of how I'm perceived sometimes, especially by my critics. I'm aware that certain subreddits and areas of the world mock the Jimquisition and what we try and do here as futile or stupid. I sometimes receive messages to that effect, some rather threatening, amusingly so. But I just want to say that although I may be a subject of ridicule in certain places, I'm not a ridiculous person, and I absolutely reject the notion that I deserve to be viewed as ridiculous. Oh yeah. Alright, maybe I'm a little ridiculous. Discussion about the cost of making games and the alleged necessity of additional monetization tactics in AAA games is at an all-time high of late, and arguments persist that $60 for a video game is just not enough to cover the costs of development. The cost that game publishers incur upon themselves. As the industry's defenders love to point out, video games never raised their prices above $60 despite inflation and the rising cost of development. The development that publishers themselves incur. Now, I've discussed in a previous episode what I call the $60 myth. I believe, with the growing necessity of season passes to complete a product, that $60 is a mere shell price, a starter pack price that gets you only a basic experience, something most typified by Battlefront 2015. Shadow of War had a pretty significant season pass as well, with entire orc tribes gated off, and that was on top of the loot boxes they had, and the 2 deluxe editions. And the physical collector's edition. Ooh, and the Totino's promotion. And the fact it was a Lord of the Rings game and was gonna sell well anyway. And the fact that Warner Brothers is a complete fucking dick. Realistically speaking, a complete product now costs closer to $80, sometimes even more in the most egregious cases. There are several other reasons to discard the idea that $60 is the real price of a game, especially in such games where a season pass doesn't even get you all the additional fucking content, Ubisoft! And I highly recommend you watch the $60 myth if you haven't done so already. But today we're going to allow the devil its advocacy and, for the sake of argument, accept the increasingly weak notion that $60 is what all full AAA games cost, and that such a cost is unsustainable. A popular solution is to suggest that instead of relying on microtransactions, season passes, downloadable content, multiple deluxe editions and other monetization strategies, games should simply raise their prices. Just be honest about the costs. Games should not cost $60 anymore is the argument used by those who believe that game publishers right now cannot afford to just do their jobs right and publish games. And you know what? I agree. I agree that AAA games these days should not cost $60 anymore. However, while others who make this statement go on to say that prices should be raised to $70, maybe even $80, I am today going to make the case for going in the complete opposite direction. AAA games should not cost $60, they should not cost $70, they should not cost $80, they shouldn't in fact cost $50, $40, $30 or $20. AAA games should be free. Completely fucking free. Let's drop the fucking charade, shall we? Even if major publishers decided to raise their prices to $70 or more, do you actually think they'd stop with the microtransactions, the loot boxes, the season passes, the digital deluxe editions? Do you think they'd be satisfied with making a comfortable profit based solely on sales? If you truly believe that, well, what I would want to call you would be unnecessarily cruel, so I won't call you a fucking... I will, however, ask what makes you think publishers would do right by you. This is, after all, an industry that knows full well DRM doesn't work as an anti-piracy measure but continues to use it anyway. This is an industry that has already admitted that the loss of microtransactions in a premium-priced game does not actually have a material impact on them. Hey Craig, I've used that EA story again. EA gets right up some people's arses. I know, but it was EA that said it, not me. As I've explained many times in the past, video game publishers don't just want some money, they want all of the money, as they've demonstrated time and time again. I mean, come on, strangle me while I come. It's the entire motive of a publicly traded company. Make more money, as much money as possible, to keep the majority shareholders pleased. They don't leave cash on the table, they won't leave cash on the table, and with companies like Ubisoft telling their investors that microtransactions are now making more money than digital sales of their actual games, with Take-Two Interactive proudly boasting about the exorbitant levels of cash GTA Online continues to rake in, there's no chance in hell you'll ever see Electronic Arts, Ubisoft, 2K, Warner Brothers or Activision Blizzard ever give up their new toys lightly. Microtransactions and loot boxes represent profits with no upper limit, and the fact they're raking it in right now but are still trying to invent new ways to manipulate and exploit customers to make even more money out of them should demonstrate to all but the most naive that this has never been about needing money, it's been about wanting money, plain and simple. And that's fine, want all the money in the world. But if you're a fucknugget about it, you're gonna get called a fucknugget. Electronic Arts has already committed, per its latest investor call, to what it calls live services. This is what companies used to call games as service, but it's been given a slicker name now. Live services encompass the online interactivity that facilitates microtransactions, loot boxes, all the additional ways in which companies can cajole their players into spending money on a continuous, consistent basis. As I already said, Ubisoft is starting to make more money off its supplementary income than it is on what's supposed to be its actual source of money. With that in mind, and considering publishers have no intention of giving up their dizzying array of revenue streams, there is no case to be made for the $60 price point being considered anything but a vestigial tale, a relic of a past age. Your major corporate publishers have done a good job of steadily mimicking free-to-play economies to the point where the launch version of Star Wars Battlefront 2 was practically indistinguishable from a freemium game, and Shadow of War let you buy your way to success before you even started properly playing. The only difference is, they charged an upfront fee. I've said it as an aside in other videos, but today I'm here to make an actual case for it. If AAA companies insist on building their games around free-to-play economies, then their games need to be fucking free-to-play, not fee-to-pay as they currently are, but actually free-to-play. There's been an understandable stigma attached to free-to-play games over the years thanks to tons of scumfuckery from the mobile market, but the reputation of the freemium game has been effectively salvaged in the past few years. Titles like Warframe and Path of Exile have demonstrated how free-to-play games can provide quality gameplay with economies that are not only successful, but largely keep their communities happy without forcing them to pay in order to stay competitive. With all this in mind, the $60 price tag now looks petty, like little more than something kept around just to make that little extra bit of cash on top of the real money source. Now I know what some of you are thinking. In fact, I definitely know it because I once got a particularly nasty email stating it. My belief that AAA publishers should just make free-to-play games would lead to the mainstream game industry going the way of the sleazy, derivative, greed-driven mobile games market. That's what'll happen, Jim. That's what'll happen. And my counterpoint to that is, how is that any different from where the mainstream game industry is already headed? In fact, in some cases, it's hard to say we're not already there. I've basically lost interest in the vast majority of EA's and Activision's games the way I've lost interest in the vast majority of mobile games for pretty much the same fucking reason. I know they're gonna be less games and more vapid excuses to keep tugging on my sleeve and begging me for more money. Even Dynasty Warriors is a complete piece of shit now, although I'm not supposed to say that till tomorrow. At this point, what have we got to lose from these companies? Not a bloody lot anymore. Companies don't want to make games anymore. They want to make live services. So fuck the $60 entry fee. It's an obsolete mule. And as I've said before, I tend to be a bit more forgiving of a game's monetization strategies if it's free. Don't get me wrong, certain tactics such as loot boxes are shamelessly shitty whatever game they're in, and I'm under no illusion that Activision, Blizzard and EA would stop being as scummy as possible in any situation. But at least you couldn't say they were trying to have their cake and fuck it too by charging a premium price for a free-to-play game, which is, in today's market, what they are pretty much doing now. By making the majority of AAA games free-to-play, companies actually stand to make more money as well, potentially. $60 might be cheap to a CEO like Andrew Wilson, but to most real people, that's still a fuck ton of money to spend on a mere video game. And during competitive release periods, $60 per purchase racks up pretty quickly, and some games inevitably get to suffer as a result. I'm looking at you, Battleborn. If a lot more games were free to start, they'd have a much better chance of roping in more players. The only problem would be physical copies of games, which publishers want to move away from anyway, and it's not like we're already living in a world where some quote-unquote physical copies are just boxes with game codes inside. I will admit, however, that the reliance on physical copies does make my proposition a bit more future-forward than I'd like it to be. Still, as digital distribution continues to grow, the case for an upfront charge diminishes more and more. I mean, let's face it, even if you're buying the physical discs these days, they still want to install 40 to 50 fucking gigs on your hard drives these days. No respect for your space. What's the point of even buying them anymore? This goddamn fucking industry. There's another concern as well, one that was raised by my longtime associate Conrad Zimmerman. If publishers fully embrace free-to-play models, it could effectively spell the death of single-player games. Again, however, and he and I both came to agree on this, aren't we already headed there? At least as far as certain publishers go. We were on track, remember, to receive a single-player Star Wars game from Electronic Arts via Visceral, but Visceral got shit-canned and EA stated it was going to replace said single-player game with yet another live service. Solo campaigns in Call of Duty are increasingly pointless and everybody wants to ride that Destiny train anyway. Live services, live services, live services. That's the buzz term of 2018. Expect to hear it a lot more, and whether they charge a premium price or not, certain AAA executives have been praying for single-player games to die off for years. Anything to skimp on creativity and expand the environment in which publishers have a direct line to the audience's wallets. And it isn't as if single-player games would disappear, they'd just be abandoned by publishers who have already insisted on ruining them. No fucking loss, mate. Let the Ninja Theories of the world focus on single-player games. Let Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice act as the basic model for a solo game, a quality, story-driven experience that charges what it needs to charge to make its money back. And then you've got companies like Bethesda, who despite their many faults are still highly committed to single-player games such as Wolfenstein and, as if by some blasphemous magic, manage to publish them without the need for gambling mechanics and other forms of putrid cloaca sludge. Let your Bethesdas, let your Devolver Digitals, let your Atlases continue crafting quality story-driven content and charge what they need to charge for it. I'm perfectly happy with that idea. But hey, I'm not suggesting something the game industry itself doesn't already know. What I'm saying isn't radical in the least. As far back as 2007, Electronic Arts was admitting that $60 might actually be too much for a video game. Hey Craig, I've busted that old article out again. Yeah, but no, I'm actually making a full-on point with it this time. To quote then CEO John Riccatello, "In the next 5 years, we're all going to have to deal with the current pricing model. In China, they're giving games away for free. People who benefit from the current model will need to embrace a new revenue model or wait for others to disrupt." Huh. In the next 5 years. Well, over the following 5 years, none of the major companies actually did embrace a new revenue model. Well, I say they didn't. They sort of didn't. In fact, when Electronic Arts launched Origin, its very own alternative to Steam, a marketplace it had utter control over, a potentially disruptive force in its own right, what did it do? Did it disrupt? Did it embrace a new revenue model? Fuck no. Fuck no. It stuck to $60 for its games, like every other intellectually lazy fucker in this business. In fact, it was on Vogue a few years back for several industry mouthpieces to say $60 was in fact too high a price, but they always had an exception for their own games. Their own games always deserved to charge $60, but for everyone else it was too high. And that's why I know whether you raise the prices or not, it doesn't really matter, because when they have the chance, they don't disrupt, they don't change, they don't do better. Change to a major corporation is like drinking fucking battery acid. I mean, just look at pharmaceutical companies and beer companies lobbying heavily and desperately against the legalization of marijuana. Better for them to legislate than be forced to compete. Better to make the world change around you than have you change around an ever-mutable world. And the game industry itself indulges in plenty of lobbying too via the ESA. It was the Entertainment Software Association, after all, that initially supported Soper and Pippa, the proposed anti-piracy legislation that would have fucked over everyone on the internet. And they only dropped support after Soper and Pippa were already fucked and they were trying to claw back some good publicity, because big companies can't and won't compete, can't and won't change. They just want to sit there making money the way they always have, and if something dares threaten it, if something actually does try and disrupt that gravy train, they will smash it and stamp on it, or appropriate it and mutate and twist it to fit their prehistoric slimy business models. And to call back to an aside I made a few moments ago, in some ways you could argue major publishers like EA did in fact embrace a much-needed new business model. The only trouble is they kept the old business model as well. They took the idea of free-to-play, twisted it, mutated it, and jammed its fresh, juicy corpse into their old, rotten, squalid hole. Double your pleasure, double your fun. Because like I always say, it's not about making money, it's about making every single last possible cent you could ever fucking imagine. And that's why, even though I say AAA games should cost nothing, that $60 is still there. Heaven forbid they don't slide their sticky tendrils into your pockets and drag out every single possible penny. Ultimately, it's not my job to solve the AAA industry's problems, though plenty of people ask pundits to do that. So there you go. There's my proposition. AAA games should not cost $60. They should cost fuck all. And now we represent the relationship between the AAA publisher and the customer, using Stardust and Pro Wrestling Ego's JD Jenkins as examples, respectively.
Hey, kick it! Well, why should we wait?
What I said. by the way, near the end of that video. It's not actually my job to solve the video game industry's problems for it. Some people do labour under that impression that because you point out the problems, you need to have all the answers. Well, no. I'm not here to wipe the game industry's shitty fucking diaper for it. I'm here to point out the problems. I have done today's episode as a theoretical suggestion, a theoretical solution, one that I do think has merit, if not for certain current limitations that we have, but it's certainly something that could be implemented with several games today, especially games that tout themselves not as game products, but as live services. Ooh. Hang on, Craig, give me a second. At that event this weekend, it was all flooded, and I fell on a really hard wood floor, which, at my size, ain't pretty. My everything fucking hurts. At any rate, this idea that the game industry needs other people to solve its problems for it, that's part and parcel my entire problem on the Jimquisition. They constantly make mistakes, they're the ones who pushed for all the big graphics, they're the ones who get themselves into fucking money holes, they're the ones who have to lay off staff all the bloody time because their costs have outweighed their ability to make money, and they pass on their problems to the customers, the end users, which ultimately, even though I may be the greatest showman in games media, that's what I am. I buy the vast majority of my games these days. I'm little more than a knobhead customer like the rest of you. I'm just dressed magnificently. After I went independent, and especially after I gave up doing traditional reviews, game companies dropped me like a lead balloon, and it's not hard to understand why. I mean, let's face it, Tecmo Co is probably never sending me anything again, but I do buy these things, I am a customer, and I do expect to spend $60 on a game and get $60 worth of content, not $60 worth of live services that just pummel me in the brain asking for more money. No, thank you.
Here's a TV that looks like an apple.
And it's like those people that still get pissy with me and are all, oh, you should do more positive videos, right? I'm not going to give you the illusion of being fair and balanced. I'm not a bloody tabloid news station, okay? I'll talk about whatever interests me. And another thing, I'm not going to do positive stuff in Fuck Konami News. Oh, Jim, why didn't you talk about Bomberman R? A, I personally didn't like it all that much, and B, it's called Fuck Konami News, not Fuck Konami News with a little bit of positivity in there. Fuck Konami! And also, thank God for me. There's nothing more.
You guide me. You guide me.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, you just keep. Oh. This is the stir treatment right here. This is what I've been looking for. A little respect. Oh, a little bit of unwinding.
I'm looking for some respect on your name.
Oh yes, please. Oh yeah, you respect me so good.
Oh yeah. You so hard.
Oh God, I love that deep, deep respect. Oh. Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes.
Call me.
I need a cigarette.